All right. Often when I travel, I don't like using pictures of places that I've never been to because that's cheesy. So the pictures that you see in my slides are places that I've been to. So here's a little trivia. Does anybody know where this place is?
Southern Alberta, Mount Assiniboine.
It is Mount Assiniboine, and I think it is actually in British Columbia, but you have to get it from the Alberta side. It's in behind Sunshine Village there. And I've been there twice, actually. I went there in the summertime. That took 8 days to backpack in and out. And I've been there in the winter. Also took 8 days to cross-country ski. And you can either get that way, or if you've got a lot of money, you can get them to bring you in with a helicopter. So I didn't have a lot of money, so I backpacked once and I skied once, so it's good. There was another picture that I showed of the first one, was magnificent mountains with this old barn. They may recognize it. That is not in Alberta, by the way, that picture. That's in Wyoming. It's in the Grand Tetons. So James was talking to me, my son, and said, did we go by that? And we did. We went past those mountains right there, but we did not go far enough in to see that barn. We were about maybe a kilometer away from the barn, so I didn't see that. Anyways, that has nothing to do with anything. I'm just waiting for you to sit down, so that's good. We noticed right away that people are buying the resources, and that's really appreciated because this is what makes the ministry go with selling the resources and donations and so forth. It looks like the library packs have been sold out, and if you see something there that you saw earlier and it's sold out, what we're going to do is, I was just on the phone with the folks in Ontario, and they said, if you would like the resources, for example, like the library pack, what we can do is we just pay for it here now, and then I will order it from Ontario, and then it'll come to the pastor. We'll make an arrangement and with the order form, and then people can get it. Because if you want to order it, you can, but you're going to pay for all the shipping and handling. So if you come through me, I don't make any money. I've told you that several times. I just do it to make it convenient for you. So if you want the library pack, I also see that the Genesis account is also sold out. So any of those resources you say, boy, I wish I had one of those, we can just get you set up. Just talk to Elaine over there and she will get you set up. When I was a kid growing up here in Alberta, I was trying to think of this week of what was the coldest day that I went through as a kid. And I couldn't remember if it was 1969 or 1970. I knew it was a January. And when I was so I was just going to elementary school. And I remember looking at the thermometer and it was minus 44. I thought, boy, this is cold as a little kid. And my mom, I think I was in grade 2. My mom was quite funny. I'm at the back door and she says, wait a minute. And she went and got this scarf and she wrapped my head up in a scarf. And she says, now don't dawdle going to school, because if you dawdle, you'll freeze to death. Now go. I'm like 7 years old, and it's 44 below, and they didn't close the schools. And where I live, I think it's going to be a little bit of breeze today. We better close the schools, right? The only time they closed the school when I was a kid growing up is when one of the water main broke, and they just flooded the entire school, but it was really cold. So then we had an instant what? Hockey rink. So it's good. Man, we should break these water lines more often. We can skate in school. Anyways, on to next things. What about those dinosaurs? It is a very requested thing of me to talk about dinosaurs because there's lots of folks that, well, where do dinosaurs fit in the Bible and how does it work? And many people, they have chosen, and I would want to be very gracious, so they say, well, we don't believe in dinosaurs because we don't know where they fit in. And I would say, well, let's just pay attention to this talk here, and maybe this will help you to understand where dinosaurs actually do fit in the Bible, and away we go. Okay, here we go. Imagine for a few moments that we're all sitting in church, right? And then the pastor comes up and he says, well, good morning, everyone. Today's sermon is on dinosaurs. And all the kids are going to say, what? All right. Man, Pastor, it's about time that we start talking about dinosaurs in this church. And then the adults might say something like, I'm not sure, well, man, should we be talking about dinosaurs in church? Well, my answer is yes. We need to be talking about dinosaurs in church, and the reason is that we are living in a culture today that is just saturated with dinosaurs, and dinosaurs have actually become the poster animal for evolution. If you maybe never thought of that before, but they are. When you see dinosaurs, they automatically equate evolution. And because we also see it in children's books and on TV, and of course in our toys, at one point in time, Lego had over 45 dinosaur kits in Lego. We also see these dinosaur theme parks popping up all over the world. For those of us from Alberta, you should recognize this. What is it? That is the visitor center at Drumheller. There used to be a time where you and your 12 best friends could climb up the back of his legs and look out of his teeth, but they don't allow that anymore. So sorry if you grew up and you did not get a chance to go that. That is one of the tallest dinosaurs in the world. And of course, we see them in these recent box office hits. I know this is a dragon, but we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. So perhaps the more important question is not, should we even be talking about dinosaurs in church, but rather this. Will this worldwide craze with dinosaurs lead our children and our young people to the Creator, or will it lead them away from Him? You know, maybe this afternoon you're saying, oh, come on, Clarence, don't be such a stiff. Everyone loves dinosaurs, right? Well, yes, they are. They are so cool, and they can be so cute. But they can also be divisive, because from an evolutionary perspective, some people believe that dinosaurs are actually millions of years old, and they went extinct long before man ever walked on the face of the earth. But from a creationist and a biblical perspective, and I'll show you where that is, the earth is actually very young, and dinosaurs are not millions of years old. And so dinosaurs can actually become a major stumbling block for many people to even believe in the Bible. So this afternoon, I'd like to help you understand where then do dinosaurs actually fit into the scriptures, and I want to help you with some of the common questions, and then also give you some very good scientific evidence that you can use when you are sharing your faith with other people. Now, maybe this afternoon you're saying, oh man, come on, isn't it just easier to avoid this topic? And I would say no, and I'll show you why. We read in 1 Peter, but sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts, always being ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you, and yet we do it with gentleness and reverence. So I want to point out two things here. Always being ready to make a defense. This is a way of saying you're not going to know what you believe, but also why you believe it. And then the second thing is we do things with gentleness and reverence. Folks, it does no good if you want to get into an argument with somebody and all you do is just beat each other up. Because when you're doing that, you do this. Beat up, beat, and all you've done is you've just created a wall between the two people. This is something that we believe at CMI, is that what good is it to win the argument but then lose the soul? This is a good principle to go on when we're talking about such things. Well, maybe we should ask this question to start off. How did we get into this conflict in the first place? Well, according to the evolutionary geological timescale, which is being taught today in the school systems, and every student has to go through this, what is being taught today is that we started off with these very simple creatures, which I think is very interesting because they're perfectly formed and they're actually very complex. This is what they say is in the fossil record. And then as we go up, these things get more complicated till we reach this area here, and they say this is the age of the dinosaurs, and that was probably anywhere from 300 million to about 65 or 75 million years ago. And then, of course, we have this top area here, and they say that man evolved about 300,000 years ago. I would like to provide perhaps a little bit different of an argument. What I would suggest is, first of all, that we never see anything in this perfect order. That never happens in the geological timetable. But what I would suggest is this. These creatures down here, which would be considered at the bottom of the geological timetable, are not buried according to the geology or their evolutionary history. They are what I'm going to call not very smart and not very fast. So if there is a global flood and you are a little tiny thing like this, you don't have a lot of brains and you're not very fast. And so guess who would be buried first in a global flood? Those creatures who are not very smart and not very fast. And so from this, we can say that as you go up the chart, you then become what? Smarter and faster. This is a reason why we don't find tens of millions of different human fossils, because they probably did what? They probably swam, they probably tried to get away from things, and in fact, that's the reason why we have very few human fossilized things in the fossil record itself, and these other animals are probably smarter, and that's the way it goes. So I would suggest that this whole chart is actually just made up. It's not scientific, and it is a function of how smart you are and how fast you can get away. What I find very interesting, however, is that recently they have found beaver and parrot and squirrel and duck-billed platypus fossils in the same fossil layer as who? Dinosaurs. Isn't that interesting? They are found in the same layer, which would simply mean this. If they were buried in the same layers of sediment, then that would probably imply that they also did what? Lived at the same time. So the question is, why do people teach and believe this chart? Well, they do that because they hear it everywhere. And today the message is simply unrelenting that dinosaurs lived millions and millions of years ago. However, a straightforward reading of the Bible contradicts this completely, because when we read in Genesis in the first chapter, it basically says this, that all land animals, including dinosaurs, I'll show you where that is later, were created by God alongside of man. And of course, if we add up all those carefully recorded genealogies of Genesis 5 and 11, at best they're going to add up to thousands of years, but certainly not millions. In the presentation this morning, we also learned that just as through one man sin entered the world, and death through sin. And so this is where dinosaurs fit in, because death, disease, and suffering of creatures that have, remember this, they breathe air and have blood, including dinosaurs, would have only occurred after Adam had sinned. And so when we see things like this is actually not true. There's not millions of years before Adam. So I want to ask you a very critical question. Who are you going to trust? Are we putting our trust in God's truth, as we looked in the first talk, where it says that he created it in a literal 6 days, or are we slipping back then to believing man's truth of millions and millions of years? Well, how we understand dinosaurs really depends on something called our worldview. Let me give you a little example of this. Here is a horseshoe crab. I want everyone to watch the crab, and in 3, 2, 1, something happened to the crab. What happened to it? Well, of course, it fossilized, just like that. So the question now arises, is fossilization a slow process that actually takes millions of years, or is it rapid burial and a fast process? Well, according to the theory of evolution, it takes millions of years in slow deposition to make a fossil. So here is our little tiny crab, and it dies, and it gets buried somewhere around there. What they do then is they say, well, each of these layers represents, say, 10,000, 100,000, million years, and they just count up all the layers, and they use that math, and away they go. That's called what from this morning? Uniformitarianism thinking. And we've already just proven that that doesn't work. The Bible, however, in Genesis chapters 6 and 7 clearly says that there was a worldwide catastrophic flood, and this, of course, would provide the perfect condition for that rapid burial and for the fast fossilization to occur. You saw this morning about a fish eating a fish. Well, here is yet another fish eating another fish. So it was just not a one-off thing. This, of course, is rapid burial and fast fossilization. Here's another one, which I don't show very often, but it's quite fun. This is an ichthyosaur. And this little one right there is part of the ichthyosaur because this thing was fossilized while giving birth. That has to be a rapid burial and fast fossilization. Well, beside these two creatures, is there any recent examples of fossilization? Of course. Here is a fossilized hat. That's not millions of years. How about a fossilized bag of flour? And if you look very carefully, you can see that the stitches are also fossilized. And so what we come through is that fossilization is a fast process, not millions of years. Here's a top hat also from the 1900s. Let's go back to our horseshoe crab. How we see things actually then depends on our worldview. So if your worldview glasses are very old, you say, well, this crab is 200 million years old. However, if you have a younger worldview, you would say, well, this crab is only thousands of years old. It was probably buried and fossilized in the global flood. So worldview is actually very important because it is on how we then interpret what we see. Our worldview is also influenced by what I'm going to call past experience. So we're going to try a little experiment here. We're going to play a game called Name That Creature. I'm going to show you something, and you're going to try to name it. If you have seen these before, I graciously would like to ask you to not give your answer because then you spoil it for everybody else. Okay? I'm obviously going to make a point about this, but I want you to see, let's just play a little game. I want you to see the correlation between what we see in the skeleton and what the creature actually looks like. So here's our first little dude. What do you think that guy is? You may know what that one is? Anybody got a guess? If you've seen my presentations before, I've changed up all the slides so that you can't guess. See? There you go. Why, that, of course, is a proboscis monkey. Couldn't you guess that from its skeleton? I don't think so. Here's another one, which is a very strange little thing. He's got kind of a bulbous head. This is a weird jawline combination eye socket. Anybody want to guess what that thing is? Very strange looking creature. The best answer I've ever had was from a little kid when I was doing this in a school. Mr. Janzen, that's an alien. It is an alien. No, it's just the neighbor's chihuahua. Isn't that incredible? Folks, you're 0 for 2, okay? Just keeping track of what your score would be here. Okay, this one we should be able to figure out. I chose an easier one here. Oh, thank you, child. That indeed is a no, it's a Chinese water deer. Wow, look at that. I didn't know that deer had those big fangs. Okay, we're 0 for 3. Got to get this one, guys. This one's a little trickier. Kind of a weird, roundy, bulby-looking head. You may want to guess what that one might be. Yeah, what do you think that is? It's close. You're the closest one yet. That's a Camarasaurus. That's a giant sauropod. These guys became huge. Okay, we're 0 for 4. Well, I'll give you a half on that one. So we're 3.5. So if this was a class, you would flunk if you were not going to pass anyway. So you got to get this last one here, okay? I got a real easy one so that we can at least feel good about ourselves. What's this thing? Okay, we got some fangs going on there. What's that? A snake. Indeed, that is a snaky fruit bat. Oh dear. So you folks, you get a half out of 5. There's a point to this, because what are the lessons that we can learn here? Well, the first lesson is the shape of the skull does not determine what the animal is going to look like. I do not want to argue whether or not you think chihuahuas are cute or they're ugly, but they certainly do not give away what they look like on the outside compared to what their skull looks like. The second thing is that fangs do not determine that the animal is going to be a savage killer. Nobody ever guesses that this guy is a grass eater. Why it has fangs like that, I think God just has a great sense of humor and says, I'm going to put the most vicious looking things on the harmless looking little Bambi dude. Okay, so what we're going to look at now is some of the common stumbling block dinosaur questions that people ask. So here we go. Question number 1, why don't I find the word dinosaur in the Bible? Good question. Well, back in 1841, this gent invented the word dinosaur from these 2 Latin words meaning terrible lizard. Now, dinosaur is actually a fairly new word because the words computer, locomotive, and rocket were in the English dictionary in 1828. The word dinosaur not invented until 1841. So in fact, that there is a time lapse there. If I was to ask you, and that would be mean, which word came first, computer or dinosaur, you would probably all guess what? Dinosaur. The King James Version of the Bible was translated into English in 1611. The word dinosaur, to be seen, was translated in invented in 1841. So we have a 230-year span there. So this is the reason why we don't see the word dinosaur actually in the Bible. Well, it raises the question then, well, what is mentioned in the Bible? Going to look at a couple of different Bible passages, and maybe we can get some answers here. The first one is the very familiar one in Job chapter 40. Now look at Behemoth, which I made along with you. I don't know what Behemoth was, but it just says there right in Scripture that I made along with you, so that means he made him at the same time as man. Otherwise, God wouldn't have said that. He eats grass like an ox, his powers in his stomach muscles, the sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. His bones are like beams of bronze, and his tail sways like a cedar. Now, where I come from, this is what cedar trees look like. Okay, they're big, monstrous-looking things. Maybe not so much out here, but we all have seen a cedar before. Now, many people believe that this thing was an elephant. And I graciously would like to say, seriously? That is a giant cedar? That is silly. There's also, in many of the different biblical commentaries, they say that it was a hippopotamus. And I would say, seriously? That looks like a flattened pine cone. That does not look like a giant cedar. Is it possible that Job was talking with a huge sauropod and that this is what God has named Behemoth? In fact, this one here, the Argentosaurus, is 125 feet long. When Job looks down that guy's tail, what does that look like to him? A giant cedar. Well, let's go over to Job chapter 41, where we're introduced to this creature called Leviathan. We have no idea what Leviathan was, because there's nothing today that looks like this thing, but he does have some very interesting characteristics. No one is so fierce that he dares to arouse him. His sneezes flash forth light. Out of his mouth go burning torches. Sparks of fire leap forth. His breath kindles coals, and nothing on earth is like him, one made without fear. Well, I don't know about you, but when I think about this guy here, something in my mind says something like that. Now, I don't know if it actually looked like this, but did you know that the word dragon and sea monster are mentioned 16 times in the Old Testament, and it's a different word than what is used for the word Satan, because Satan is often called the dragon, but it's a different word. Well, what then would cause a dragon then to breathe fire? In chemistry, because I taught chemistry for all those years, this is what's called a combustion reaction. To make this reaction go, you need three basic things. You need a fuel of some sort, you need some oxygen, and you need a sparking mechanism to make it work. If you have these three things in the right order, in the right quantities, you can make fire. Is there any modern day animal that can do this? And the answer is no. But here is a little bit of a start. Let me introduce you to this little guy. It's called the bombardier beetle. This guy can actually make explosions out of his back end of his tail there. And how does he do it? He mixes these two liquids at 500 explosions per second. What are these magical liquids? Well, the first one's called hydrogen peroxide. This is its atomic structure. This is where the 14-year-old boys start writing notes down to see on how we make explosions. Please don't do that. Hydrogen peroxide is still used today for what medical purpose? Yep. It's disinfectant. It's used for cleaning cuts. So you can still buy this stuff, but don't, okay? The other one is a little trickier. This is called hydroquinone. This is its atomic structure. Does anybody know where they used to use this? It used to be fairly common, probably about 40 or 50 years ago. You used to use this stuff to get rid of your freckles. I think freckles are cool, but you could use this stuff. Now, this little beetle, who's not very big, he's about this big, he mixes these two chemicals in this combustion chamber, and they come out of this muscle here at an explosive 212 Fahrenheit. That's 100 degrees Celsius, and this explosion happens 500 per second. They've also figured out that using a high-speed camera, this little thing has a turret on its butt. And what the turret can do is it can shoot that guy, and then get away really quickly by spinning this turret on his bum. Isn't that incredible? Now, is this a start? Well, it is a start. Let's take these kinds of concepts and we'll apply them to this veggie-eating dinosaur. He's a pretty big guy, 31 feet long, 2.8 tons, and his skull is 6.5 feet. So that's how tall I am. Well, maybe an inch shorter. So his head is as big as my whole body. Now, what I've done here is I've taken the idea of the bombardier beetle, and I'm going to apply it to this particular Vegisaurus dinosaur. And what I've done here is I've colored in the horn inside there, and there's these hollow chambers there. So there's hollow chambers that connect through the nostrils and the mouth. Now, that is going to provide something very interesting. These creatures, when they eat their food, the byproduct of their digestion can then travel up and be contained inside of these chambers up there. The nostrils will provide oxygen, and there is a possibility in their jaw there, either grinding their teeth together. Some of this particular species of dinosaurs have also found little pouches of rocks in their mouth. Could they grind it together and make a spark? Well, we have no idea. But if we have a gas, if we have an oxygen, and we have a sparking mechanism, we can have fire. Do we know this for sure? Well, of course not, because we cannot recreate this. But I want you to think of it this way. Would it ever occur to you, if you came across the skeleton of an electric eel, would it ever occur to you that this animal could produce 500 volts of electricity? So there you're walking along, you see the skeleton, you say, that thing can produce 500. You would never think that, of course. So there's lots of things that are happening at the biological level that we do not understand. And so it is with these fire-breathing dragons. Now, something interesting happened here in Alberta in 2004. The Dracorex, or dragon dinosaur, was discovered, and interestingly enough, after careful analysis, they found out the digestive system of bacteria that produce huge quantities of, methane gas and flammable acids. Isn't that convenient? Now, we've been talking about these gases here for a minute. Are there animals today that can produce gas? Of course, sheep can. In fact, one sheep can produce up to 80 liters of methane gas in one day. Now, how does this work? Well, very simply, we have two things in. Grass goes in one end, and pardon me, but gas comes out the other. Now, here is something that's really new. Cows can also produce greater quantities of gas, and here we have a cow with a gas bag of 200 liters. On many farms today in Europe, and now even starting in North America, farmers are collecting this gas from their intestines, and they're using this natural gas to run their natural gas farm equipment. I'm not asking you to go out and do this, but if you light up 200 liters of gas, you're going to end up with a huge fireball. And remember that these dragon dinosaurs were probably 10 times bigger than a modern day cow. The most important thing is, remember, the fire is occurring outside of the body as it leaves the mouth and not from inside the stomach. So when we see these movies where that dragon thing goes and then his tummy gets all ready, fantastic. You can do that once and then you've blown your gizzards out and then you're going to die. So we have to remember that it is happening outside of the mouth. There you go. Stumbling block question number 2. Were dinosaurs on the ark? Well, dinosaurs, we believe, were created on day 6 of the creation, because we just said that this guy was created alongside of you. Then they were created with the other land animals, so they must have been on the ark. Now, this is a common children's cartoon, and this is way out of scale because this looks like a silly little children's ark, and there's something missing on this one. What's missing on this ark, even in the children's programs here? Dinosaurs. Should we put some dinosaurs on the ark? I like that. Let's put these bad boys on there. Don't choose some sissy chicken looking thing that eats grass. Put something that's got some attitude on there. Look at those guys. Those guys were on the ark. Now, in the talk this morning, I talked about the creation order. These are God's different created kinds. Now, someone actually from CMI, they did a PhD thesis on all the different kinds of animals that there are, of all the different kinds that have lived, all the different kinds that are present today, and even they added a bunch of extra ones that maybe they say they have gone extinct. And including all the different animals, there's probably about 8,000 kinds of animals required to be on the ark, and of course the rest were in the water. So God would not choose whales to go onto the ark because they don't need to. The other thing would be is that there was a limited amount of space, and so you don't take 800 different dogs and cats. You just had to take one of each kind. So let's look at some dog skulls, for example. There is our Chihuahua. Do you remember that thing? This is the skull of a lab. There's a poodle, and there's a Great Dane. If you didn't know any better, you would look at those things and you would say, my goodness, those are three very, very different creatures. But if you were asked the Great Dane, they'd say, hey man, we're all dogs. Why? Because they all came as descendants from that original dog kind. Well, does this apply to dinosaurs? Let's have a look at these two skulls here. Let me point out some of the characteristics. We got a brain cavity, eye socket, nostril, jawline, little bump on the back of your head, little bump on the back of your head. When scientists look at them, they said, well, this one is an Apatosaurus, this one is Diplodocus. Now, I graciously would like to say to you, what do you see there? It's the exact same thing. Look how different the dogs were, and they're all dogs. These are exactly the same creature. Now, we have a problem here because if we're naming two creatures that are exactly the same, different names, what are you going to end up with? Well, you end up with this nonsense. There are 540 different types of dinosaurs. You also realize that dinosaurs, like other creatures, change over time. I'll use me as an example. If you found me as a little tiny person, or me as an old man, and you didn't know any better, you'd say, well, those are two completely different creatures, but it's the same person. It's the same creature, because our bodies change over time. And so after a closer look at the fossil records, scientists now suggest there's only 50 kinds of dinosaurs, and that, of course, would be very included in the 8,000 different ones. So we don't need to bring all of these 540 different ones onto the ark, and that, of course, makes much more sense. Now, here is a picture here of a better representation of ark size to animals, and those guys right there are two huge sauropods. Now, what most people don't realize is that dinosaurs, like many other creatures, start out as a what? Eggs. And in fact, most dinosaur eggs are no larger than an ostrich egg or a very small junior-sized football. So it would make way more sense that when God directed the animals on the, because God did it, Noah didn't sit there and chase these things around there, he would only choose juvenile, little tiny dudes. He would not choose the grandpa and grandma ones because A, we would take up too much space, and when we get let off the ark, we probably would then be past our ability to reproduce. So it makes way more sense then that God chose small creatures of all the different types on there. Scientists have also studied this dude here, which I showed you earlier. This is the Apatosaurus. And they actually, by looking at the fossil record, can actually chart its growth spurt. And so, like teenage boys today, they go through this growth spurt in their life, where you just can't stop feeding these creatures because they still keep coming back for more food. By looking at this, we can say, you know what? This dinosaur then works very well onto the ark. You put them when this particular guy is about either 4 or 5 years old, and then you kick him off the ark about a year and a half later, and notice then what happens is that its growth spurt coordinates with its teenage growth spurt, but it's also when the earth then has had a chance to do what with its vegetation? Replenish it, so that there is food and availability and space and availability for these things then to go explore all of these different environments. And of course, that works very perfect with the ark analogy. All right, we're going to play a little game here called Name That Dinosaur. This is where kids usually rock because they know the dinosaurs and the adults don't. I have done this one many times, and when I was touring in, I think we were in Manitoba, there was a little boy, and he got every single one of them right. And I've never had anybody ever before or since get all these dinosaurs. The kids will do well. Older people, parents, don't feel bad. Okay, if you don't know all your dinosaur names, that's okay. God still loves us. Okay, we're going to start off with something easy, then we're going to get progressively harder. Who's that guy? That is a stegosaurus. It was a little voice. You could hear it right away, right? All right. What does the name stegosaurus actually mean? This is where it gets harder. Well, stegosaurus means the roof lizard or plated lizard. All right? You got to remember these because you're going to see these later on. We should be able to get this bad boy. Absolutely. What does his name mean? Oh dear. You can shout it out, sure. Terrible lizard, tyrant lizard. What did you say? Thunder lizard? Well, we can go with thunder lizard too. But tyranno comes from the word we have tyranny, terrible, tyrant. Okay, this one is quite a bit more difficult. And I want to point something out before you just shout it out because otherwise you won't get it. This is a sauropod, but he's got spikes on the end of his tail. Let me know what this one is. I'll give you a hint. It's named after a place in China. Oh, that helps. This is called the Shunnosaurus. It's part of the sauropod family, and his name means this. This is the shoe lizard, named after the Sichuan province in China. Okay, we're not doing so good here, folks. We got to do better, okay? We got to get these lizards here, these dinosaurs. This one is actually a fairly difficult one, and what makes this guy interesting is that it is semi-aquatic. So he lives part of his life in the water and part of his life on land. Does anybody know what this one is? This is a hard one. Hey, this is the Nothosaurus. If you've been paying attention, what do you think its name means? Notho means false. So this is called a what? False lizard. He's a semi-aquatic sea monster. Okay, I'm going to give you one more. You're going to get this one. You have to get this one. Let me know what this one is. That is very close. Unfortunately, he's not that, although he does have some of its characteristics. This guy is named after the province that we are standing in right now. Very good. Albertosaurus. So what do you think his name means if we're following the pattern here? Please say Alberta lizard. Good. I call him the T-Rex light. Now, if this dinosaur comes from Alberta, he's missing something very important. You know what it is? Yeah. That is on how dinosaurs died out. They played hockey until they froze to death. All right. The people in BC love that joke because never mind. I thought it would be interesting to track evidences from around the world where dinosaurs and human beings coexisted. And by the time I finished doing the research, that map was completely covered in red. And so I've actually eliminated about 80% of the dots. What I'd like to do is this. I'd like you to jump onto a fictitious airplane with me, and we're going to fly all over the world now, and we're going to visit some of those dots. Okay? I'm going to show you some evidence. Our first stop on our plane trip is in Spain, and we're going to stop at the government palace in Spain, and specifically in the government palace is a chapel, which is like a church. And inside this chapel, there is an altar. And on the altar is an altar cloth. And you've probably seen those before, right? And on that altar cloth is a stitching of a particular scene. And that happens to be the slaying of the dragon of St. George in 303 AD. Now, what I find very interesting is that this altar cloth was sewn in 1600 AD. Now, what is this creature right here? I showed it to you earlier. That is a what? That is a Nothosaurus. The trick is this, though. The Nothosaurus was first discovered in 1833, but the cloth was sewn in 1600, and the painting was done in 303, which then asks this very important question: how did these artists know what a dragon or dinosaur looked like if they'd never seen one before? Why is this guy not on the altar cloth? Or this guy? Or this guy? You see, it seems that these creatures were known to the artist and the person who sewed this thing, because otherwise, how would they get it perfectly accurate? Let me help you with your math. If I ask you to draw a diagram of an animal you've never seen, what is the mathematical probability that you would draw that animal perfect? If I asked you to draw a Hephalumposaurus, what's the probability? 0. There's no way that you could draw something you had never seen before. Well, let's jump back in the plane and let's go over to Paris. Oh, no, just to France. Sorry, I was thinking it was in Paris. I took French when I was a kid in Alberta, and I couldn't do it very well. And so I asked the French teacher where I was working how you pronounce this. And she said, "Janzen, you'll never speak French, so don't bother. So we're going to call this Fancy Palace in France." And in the Fancy Palace, there are these wood carvings. And in this wood carving on the wall, they say this thing is a salamander. And I would say, under closer examination, this is a fire-breathing salamander. That looks like a what? A characteristic of a dragon. Do you guys have any fire-breathing salamanders here in Alberta? No? Okay, because I've never seen a salamander that is a fire-breathing one. That looks like a dragon to me. Let's go to Cambodia. Cambodia has this massive temple. It's called the Temple of Angkor. It was finished in 1186 AD, so it's been around for a long time. Now notice I've also given you the flags of these countries. What's on the flag of Cambodia? The temple. So in order to get something on your country's flag, you got to be pretty important. What do we have on the Canadian flag? The maple leaf. I think we should just change that to the Tim Hortons coffee, and then everybody would know exactly who we are. And on the Temple of Angkor, they have all of these pillars with carvings on them. And here is one of the pillars, the carvings. What do you think that creature is? Well, that, of course, is a Stegosaurus. Now, that is very interesting because the temple was dedicated, which means finished building, in 1186, but the first Stegosaurus fossil was not discovered until 1877. Now, what makes Stegosaurus very interesting, it is one of the few dinosaur-like creatures that has these very, very interesting geometric plates on its backside. There is no creature today that looks anything like a Stegosaurus. They had to have seen this thing because there's no way that they could have chipped this thing out of the rock way back then. That's 1186. So we're talking 1100, 1200, 1300 years ago when they were building this thing. They had to have seen these creatures. Let's fly over to England, and we have this massive cathedral. It's sort of like a church. And by the way, have you noticed that all of the buildings I've shown you are massive buildings and temples and stuff? They're not these little obscure things way out in the back 40. You can go visit these things, and you can go inside this cathedral. And under the massive cathedral is the tomb of Bishop Bell, who died in 1496. So he passed away a long time ago. Now, the bishop had a request. He said, "When I die, I want you to bury me under the church with all the rest of them, but I also want you to put around my tomb all my favorite animals." So they said, "We'll do it." These are the brass carvings around his tomb. What do you think that thing is? That's a dog. What about that thing? Fish. So he liked dogs, he liked fish, he liked birds. I don't know if it's a chicken or not, but it's a bird. This one is not a snake. It's a long creature, and it's not a worm. It's an eel. And he also had this. What are these things? They're dinosaurs. Now, what's very interesting is that these dinosaurs are interlocked their necks. They are bracing against one another in a fighting or pushing posture. And you'll also notice that this dude's got spikes on his tail, and this one doesn't. So what is this one over here? I showed that to you earlier. That is the Shunosaurus. from the sauropod family. Isn't that interesting that the details of even spikes on its tail was given? How in the world would they have known on how to show the posture of these things pushing against one another, and one has spikes and the other one doesn't? Let's go over to China, because China's got some really interesting things, including their Chinese calendar. Now, on the calendar, we see lots of different animals. We have the year of the dog, the chicken, tiger, sheep, rabbit, and of course, the year of the dragon. I find that very interesting. In fact, the Chinese calendars date back more than 2,000 years, and dragons, dinosaurs, are lumped in with these other very common animals that we find on the farm. What I also find very interesting is this is just an artist's understanding of this Dracorex, which they found here in Alberta. Do we know exactly what this thing looked like? Please say no, because all we have is their bones. So this is an artist's understanding. If you like these kinds of things, little side view here, we have this coffee table book called Dire Dragons. It has about 80 examples around the world of where dinosaur and human beings had to have coexisted. And the message of the gospel is also shared into that book. By the time you read to the end of it, the message of the gospel is shared. I think this is an excellent book. It is actually done by Vance Nelson, who lives here in Alberta, and we have supported Vance for many years. I've known Vance for a long time. He's done a whole series of these untold secrets of planet Earth. Because this is a dinosaur talk, this is why I have these ones here. You can order online from CMI this other DVD called Dragons or Dinosaurs. It is sort of a different twist to the talk that I'm giving you, and the end result, of course, is that dragons and dinosaurs are the same thing. All these examples I've given you are what we call indirect evidence. So this gives evidence of that. Strong correlation. You may want to ask, well, is there any direct physical evidence of recent dinosaurs? Here we go. Back in 2005, Dr. Mary Schweitzer, she was a research paleontologist at North Carolina University, and she was working in Montana, which is just south of here, and she found this thing, which is the femur of a T-Rex. So does anybody know which bone is the T-Rex femur? Anybody know which one that is? That's its thigh bone right there. Okay, so she found this thigh bone, and she said, wow, this thing is huge. And it didn't fit in her van. So what she did is she cut this massive big bone in half, and she stuck it in the van. And then as she's driving, she goes, man, this thing stinks. Something weird's going on here. She got it back to the lab. She scooped out some of the bits, stuck it on a microscope slide, treated it, and stuck it underneath the microscope. And Dr. Schweitzer, in this thing here, she found branched blood vessels with red blood cells still intact. And she said, that's impossible. These things died out 65 million years ago. She did the experiment 17 times in a row before she finally said, those are red blood cells from a T-Rex. In an interview, she said, everyone knows how soft tissues degrade. If you take a blood sample, you stick it on a shelf, you nothing recognizable in about a week. So why would there be anything left in dinosaurs? Now, Montana also is not a state that has perfect temperature. It's like here. It gets warm in the summer and cold in the winter. Does warm and cold do really good for preservation of things? It doesn't. It wrecks them. This made Dr. Schweitzer very curious. She went back out into the field and she dug up some more of this stuff. And she found actual stretchy ligaments and soft, spongy tissues in Tyrannosaurus rex. You can see this right here. This is a ligament, and under a microscope, she's got two tweezers, and she's going, this thing still stretches. How's that possible? This thing died out 65 million years ago. Excuse me. Is there any more evidence of this kind of soft tissue business? Of course. Here in Alberta, again, this is a juvenile ceratopsids. Now, this thing was found very interesting because all of his internal organs were still intact. Heart, liver, spleen, gallbladder, lungs, everything. They're all found there, which is very interesting. Now, what was also interesting is the CBC News, said this. It was preserved because it was buried right at the time of death before any of these soft tissues had rotted away. Now, what would we call that? Rapid burial, fast fossilization. And then in true CBC style, they said, and that thing's now been lying there for 70 million years. Is soft tissue going to lie around for 70 million years? Of course not. It's going to disintegrate. One more. This one here is a hadrosaur skin that was found in 2013 near Grand Prairie in Alberta here. And it was taken to Dr. Barbie, who is in the University of Regina. And he had this chunk of skin there, and he said, this is amazing. This thing comes from this hadrosaur, which is this duck-billed. And he looked at this and says, my goodness, this is real skin. And real skin falls apart very quickly. This skin simply cannot be 70 million years old. In fact, here is a list of actual biological tissues that have been recently found in dinosaurs. Blood vessels, arteries, and veins. More than 40 other samples around the world have been found of these things. Red blood cells that were not degraded. All these different types of proteins. DNA, and recently RNA. Now, what makes RNA so interesting is that RNA is a single strand of genetic information, and it is way more fragile even than DNA. So, excuse me, this stuff actually breaks down very easily. I think about this as direct evidence the next time someone says to you, well, these things died out 65 million years ago. Well, that's not possible if we have all these tissues and blood vessels and different collagens and DNA and now even RNA. I don't think it's possible that they died out 65 million years ago. Well, the last question is this: what happened to the dinosaurs? What caused them and many other animals to go extinct? Well, the most honest answer is that nobody really knows. But I want to give you a couple of reasonable explanations. And the most obvious one is that most of them died out in the global flood with millions of other animals. And this is why we see these huge dinosaur and fossil beds, which is the result of a global flood. That's when most of these creatures were buried and fossilized. We see these huge fossil beds all over the world. Excuse me. Sorry. It's drier here. Just kidding. Next one. A change in climate. Now, notice how I worded that, folks. Could you imagine that if you have a very nice triceratops there and he happens to wander, and I'll just say Alberta for sake of proximity, and he's sitting there and doesn't realize that in the wintertime, it does what? It snows. Now, these creatures are cold-blooded, and if you're not prepared for something like this and you're cold-blooded, you're probably going to do what? You're going to die. So there is a change in climate that these things did not know about, and they probably died in a variety of different ways. Here's another one that I think is very possible. It's called genetic entropy, a breakdown in their DNA due to stresses. Folks, you may not know this, but this is happening at an alarming rate today. You may not know this, but we are all genetically breaking down. We are not getting evolutionary better. We are getting worse. And the reason why we know this is because there are certain things that are happening today that did not happen even a generation ago. When I was a young kid growing up, nobody had a peanut allergy. Nobody was lactose intolerant or gluten intolerant. These are generational things that have now come into the system, and they are definitively important, and they have to be dealt with. But they are a result of our genetic entropy that we are slowly falling apart. I once said to my students, I don't think we'll be around for 15 or 20 more generations. And one of the kids says, hey, wait a minute, we're only one generation. You can't say that because we'll all be dead. I said, yeah, I know, you figured that out. Because we will not know what goes on from 20 generations from now, but we also know that we can see that the human genome is on this trajectory, which is not very good. Well, the last reason is diseases. There are diseases out there that we have no idea what existed years ago because we've only invented certain things like electron microscopes and different ways of testing things. And these diseases, of course, didn't fossilize, so we have no idea what diseases or pathogens existed years ago. Now, what is an interesting little twist on this is that there's both species of plants and animals that scientists say, oh, these things, they went extinct millions of years ago. But recent discoveries say, oh, these things are actually alive and well on Earth. Well, here we go. This is the Wilhelmina pine. Apparently, it went extinct 150 million years ago. Oops, recently found again in Australia. Perfectly formed, exactly the same. Well, I tell you, that is really crazy to think that this thing went extinct 150 million years ago and then just magically appeared today. This is the best one, the coelacanth fish. It died out 400 million years ago until, oops, it's actually very alive and well today. And if evolution was true, according to environmental pressures, this thing should look nothing like this after 400 million years of evolution. And yet the skeleton and the fish today that we see, who's swimming in a fish tank right there, are actually the exact same fish. Well, in the end, we really don't know. And if we never figure out all the reasons why dinosaurs died out, it's okay. There's some important things that we want to conclude here. That there's no need for the church to be silent or uninformed about dinosaurs, because Christians can boldly proclaim a literal 6-day creation as clearly written in the book of Genesis, no matter how much the culture has become evolutionized with their millions of years. And dinosaurs can be a conversation starter for Christians to share their faith. Dinosaurs do not need to be divisive. It's not about winning those arguments. It's about winning souls. A quick summary then. Dinosaurs were created on day 6 of the creation with man and all of the other land animals, because that's what it clearly says in Genesis 1:24. And when Job confronted against God, he says, remember this guy which I created alongside of you. The word dinosaur was not invented until 1841. Instead, the Bible uses words like behemoth, leviathan, dragons, and sea monsters. And of course, all 50 dinosaur and dragon kinds could have easily fit onto the ark. Dinosaur evidence is found all over the world in art, carvings, tapestry, and cultural history. Here it is, long before their fossils were ever found. And the rapid burial and preserved remains of dinosaurs are also being found all over the world today. And we can use dinosaurs as scientific evidence against that millions of years, because Genesis is real history, and we can trust in the inerrant word of God right from the very first verse. I'd like to end with this. Dinosaurs can become an effective witnessing tool for overcoming people's stumbling blocks to the gospel. I'm not going to put a hockey stick on this guy. I want to be serious for a minute. All of this boils down to, in my opinion, one thing, which is this. It's the matter of the heart. You're either going to accept what the Scripture says and understand that we are sinners and we need to repent and we need to put our trust in God, and that has nothing to do whether or not dinosaurs are 65 million years old or they are, of course, a recent thing. One of the things that I'd like to encourage you is to get connected with thecreation.com. It is free. I know I was being silly about that, but you can get with thecreation.com and also through InfoBytes lots of information on dinosaurs. If you're a homeschooler or you're in school right now and you want to do a project, man, there's probably 75 or 100 articles just on dinosaurs on the website. I also just mentioned again the Creation magazine, and I bring this one up in particular. This is one entire magazine dedicated just to dinosaurs. At Creation, we try to put at least one dinosaur example in every magazine because people are constantly interested in that. This one is also from this particular one. I'm so grateful that my children have had the life-saving benefit of being exposed to your magazine for years, raising and working around teenagers. I see they struggle because they are indoctrinated from day one with real scientists don't believe in the Bible. Here it is, folks. If their parents don't support them, usually they'll have no support. Our kids are not going to buy this stuff, but they will read it if it's sitting there on the kitchen table or on the coffee table. As parents, we have to support our kids because they're not going to go do this themselves. I just encourage you to check out all the dinosaur resources. I actually don't know which ones are back there and which ones are sold out. Lots of stuff back there in dinosaurs. There's a brand new one there called Titans. It's an excellent book. It's quite thick. It has lots and lots of information on dinosaurs. Just one last thing I share again with this. This is always my closing verse. Your faith should not rest on the wisdom of God, but on the power of man. Oh no, it's not rest on the wisdom of man, but on the power of God. You see how those two things have been reversed today? I encourage you to make sure that we get that straight. Okay, that's the end of this presentation. I forgot to look at my thing. What are we doing next, Pastor? A short break. Awesome. We'll take a short break. Thank you for paying such close attention. Well done to the kids who got most of the answers to those things, and adults for being good sports. Thanks very much.